Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It does not make a difference when you're watching, it just matters that you're watching. My name is Seth, and I've decided to start this mini series so that I can help to educate people more. Of course, I want to grow it into something else, but to start, I want to get the most important things across. So, for a little bit, I'm going to be making videos kind of explaining different parts of what you could call the human experience, based on things that I've learned so far from what you could call a difficult childhood. um, I spent a lot of time and a lot of energy focusing on trying to heal from past things, to fully understand who I am, as well as understand the human condition so that I can help others. That's genuinely just been a mission of mine for a long time, is to just help as many people as possible. So today, as the title explains, we're going to be talking about the ego. And there's a lot of misconceptions about the ego. A lot of people use ego incorrectly within sentences, within descriptors, things like that. So the ego itself is meant to be helpful. It's meant to, in a sense, kind of provide your self-worth to you. But there's a lot of other things within you that tend to kind of make an impact on that ego, right? So overinflated egos, just being cocky all the time, leads to materialism and entitlement, and we've all met that one overly inflated, egotistical person. It's just what it is. But the thing that you really need to understand, especially with those kinds of people, is that the ego can be influenced a lot by outside forces, third-party forces, especially if you're not careful about it. The amount of support that you get and the amount of things that you are taught when you are a child, whether that be positive or negative, makes a huge impact on it. As most of your ego is subconscious. A lot of it is subconscious tendencies. I don't want to say all of it, because there's a lot of conscious decisions you make that are egotistical. But again, some of them can be subconscious based on patterns and such. Let me explain a little bit. So first of all, when we get to this little diagram here, so we see the ego and the self and the shadow. So the self is basically the perfect balance of the shadow, or the it's a perfect balance of the shadow. So the animus, that's basically the divine masculine and divine feminine balance within yourself. So that mixed with the ego, perfect balance, find yourself. Now what we see on the outside is consciousness, personal unconscious, and collective unconscious. So the collective unconscious, summed up essentially, is the influences that you have around you. It's a collective mindset of the people around you and the things that you are surrounded by. The personal unconscious has more to do with, I want to say, somewhat to do with subconscious behaviors, but the personal unconscious is always interacting with the collective unconscious. We'll put it like that. So that's kind of just an idea of how, like, if you were to structure your brain, that's what it would look like. If you were to structure your, spirit, soul, the self, that's what it would look like. So to go a little bit more in depth with all of this, we have another one here. So the subconscious, as I was talking about, 95% of your time is spent there. Okay, the subconscious develops at a very early age, and the thought patterns that you are given by your parents or caregivers, and the subconscious thoughts that you have or create as a result of the surroundings, hence I was saying the collective unconscious, your subconscious forms thought patterns as well as actual responses based on the collective as well. How this relates to the ego and inner child, and for a lot of people, I've noticed that a lot of people don't really even know that the inner child is a thing. Because I think we've modernized more of a, oh, you need to grow up and oh, you need to do this kind of thing. So the child that you were is still alive within you, always. And it's always going to carry any unhealed or repressed emotions that you were never able to get through. Unconsciously, you're going to seek love and approval if your inner child does not feel safe, does not feel the love or the approval from you or the people around you. So, to put this into an example, for me at least, when you spend your whole childhood growing up with parents that don't necessarily approve of the things that you do, not because they're wrong, but because they're different, because you might be a bit more free spirited, because you might, I don't know, just formulate different opinions on life, and they start to act on it. Okay, your caregivers all of a sudden don't try to understand you anymore. They just gaslight you and try to change the person that you are. Your inner child remembers this, and subconsciously, you're, internalizing that. So not only do you seek that love and approval, it becomes a subconscious habit. So this is where the ego and the higher self come in. So the higher self, before we get to the ego part, the higher self is a very spiritual thing. It is something that you learn to communicate with, sort of. We'll just stay with communicate with for simplicity. You learn to communicate with it through many different methodologies, many different religious, not ceremonies, but practices. Meditation is the one that I use. As y'all know, I have a song called Higher Self. That song is a conversation. So your highest self is who you are authentically, without anyone else there. If you were the last person on earth and you had no fear of being judged at all, your highest self is who you would be. That's where your love is based. That's where your self-love is based more than anything, because you have to be able to love yourself before you can love other things. It's the soul. I like the way that it says the witness of the human experience. That's what it is, because the highest self has no emotions necessarily tapped into how it acts on a daily basis. Like the inner child, the ego, and subconscious don't necessarily exist. The highest self is who you are regardless of any circumstance, right? But because of the influences we have, the human condition, and the way that, our emotions can become quite violent, we have the ego. It's a self-created psyche to kind of protect your sense of self-esteem when you meet people that don't resonate with you. Or when you meet people that resonate with you, you are able to accurately describe yourself as your ego. It's a little bit, it is a bit difficult, but if you're super sensitive to criticism and being misunderstood, then you do have ego problems. It's just what it is. I know it says, that's just kind of a definition of ego, but being sensitive to criticism, being influenced by third-party influences, is basically what happens when you're not tapped into the other three parts of yourself as well as you could be. The ego is actually also where you draw labels for yourself and other people. When you meet someone and they might do something that's very normal to them, and you see that and you're like, oh, that's weird, or you be a little bit over judgmental, that's a part of your ego. Being overly judgmental is an ego problem. I don't want to sound like I'm trying to be the perfect person or anything, because, I definitely have to find myself checking my ego every now and then. I definitely have to get into contact with my inner child every now and then. I definitely, and I have proof now, have to tap into my highest self. And most of the time, especially as I was healing not too long ago, had to fully tap into my subconscious belief systems, subconscious habits, subconscious thoughts, things such as. So My point in this is that all of these have to work within balance. And if they're not balanced, then things form within you, emotional responses, subconscious responses, overall stimulus responses in general, really, that aren't your highest self. So we have access to our higher self in order to maintain this balance, which is why I will always push for meditation, whether it's of your spiritual practices or not, pushing for, a spiritual practice that helps you get into touch with all of these aspects of yourself and help you to kind of fully understand what you should be, what you could be, what your highest self is, and using your ego to implement that in the best way possible. Your ego is where you feel misunderstood from as well. It says that in the chart. You probably read that. But I want to kind of not clarify, but just expand on that. Feeling misunderstood is very normal for creative people, as well as people who might have had a lot of past lives and have a lot of knowledge of situations that they've never encountered before within this life. Because under the circumstances of that, you're basically tapped in to a higher knowledge, a higher source of knowledge. And people really don't understand that not only is what you're saying more true than they might understand, what you're saying is meant to help. And they don't always receive it that way. So when you're feeling misunderstood, when you're feeling like that criticism, right, is from a place of misunderstanding, your ego might try to compensate for that. And what I would say is it's really not that important. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all free to express ourselves however we want. We're all free to do just about anything we want with our lives. I mean, you deserve a life that you create, correct? That's what your ego is there for, to help you create the life that you deserve. And being misunderstood is always part of the journey. Being criticized is always part of the journey. Taking massive hits to your self-esteem is part of the journey. It's what it is. So, what I overall want to get across here is that not only, back to the balance thing, because it is extremely necessary, but being able to kind of understand that your ego is kind of created before you decide to change anything about it is the easiest way to forgive yourself for any imbalance that you might have. And that's the key. I mean, love and gratitude are the biggest forces in the known universe. It's how it works. When you're gracious for the life that you live, when you're gracious for the experiences you have, you're gifted more experiences. You're gifted more of what you like. You're gifted more love. And when you express love in the fullest and least judgmental way possible, you open yourself up to receiving more things. Not, physical things, but, probably what you might call upgrades, higher understandings, better, clearer vision, better intuition, clairvoyance, claircognizance, clairaudience. Everyone is born with a very special and very specific set of gifts to help you navigate your way through your life. But as you begin to, balance yourself out and act in a way that is your most authentic self, you begin to get upgrades to those, and you even begin to upgrade. I'm just going to keep using the word upgrade. I like that. You begin to upgrade yourself in ways that you probably didn't even think that you could be. Okay, growth looks good on everyone. That's a fact. So how growth looks on you, no matter what, will always look good. And just to kind of come back to it, this is kind of the ego but broken down. It's like the bubble chart I had at first, but it's a little bit different, and it kind of breaks it down more. So the ID is self-explanatory. It's how you identify. It's very instinctive. It's very primitive. It's entirely unconscious, which also means that it is a bit subconscious. And I'm going to keep repeating that because I have, a little message to go along with that towards the end, but I want to get more things through. So, um, the center of wants and primal desires. I think that's a talking point. That's a very large talking point. Um, the ID, or how you identify, as it is unconscious, the center, for it to be the center of your wants and desires, your ego as well as a superego are what determines how you express that. So how you identify is, like it says, what you're born with. But the ego and the superego is how you express that in your reality, how you justify expressing things a very specific way. Um, like I said, is literally located in the subconscious. Like the things that you do, while you are born with a lot of subconscious things, you also, from the ages of like 0 or born to 5, you are extremely impressionable. And it really, like it says pleasure principle too, that develops a lot from, born to 5. Those years are very critical for development. And then after that is when your ego and superego start to really develop. It's why kids are such a bitch to deal with, bro. Like, your ego and superego don't develop all the way until you're 5. So, terrible twos, all that, that's about when you realize, hey, I have the ability to do this. I can do whatever I want. I am this. So therefore, I will act in this way. It's up to parents and, guardians in general to help you develop your ego and superego. The problem with our society today, and I will say this, is there's a huge call to develop an ego and a superego by creating your child instead of allowing them to have the basics and develop things on their own, right? So we have don't run with scissors. It's a very simple thing. Just before you develop your ego, your superego, you might be doing things with scissors, or you might be running around with knives or whatever. It's why you keep the gun safe locked. Guns are intriguing. Little kids shoot themselves all the time because they have no idea. So from the ages of, I will say it again, born to 5, your job is to give them the basics. Your job is to help them understand kind of the world that they're going into. And then from that point on is when the ego and the superego can be developed from either a religious standpoint, if that's your thing. I'm not one to judge. I think that having a religious foundation is important, but I think that choosing one specific religion is a bit limiting, because genuinely there is truth in all religions. There's truth in all spiritual practices. It really just, it's a user experience, It depends on what floats your boat. So, like I said, the ego is your rationality. It ensures that the ID's wants are acceptable in the real world, which is where your subconscious beliefs might be formed, going back to that point of invalidation and gaslighting of your emotions and things can actually destroy your ego. If your parents were immature, like mine, and you had to prematurely mature, you had to find a way to grow up as fast as possible. So because they didn't, teach you anything that you felt was necessary for you, which is of a lot of cases, even if you don't necessarily think about it that much, that's a subconscious thing, and that's also an ego thing. So I don't like how it says this, but I really liked the whole, so it says mostly located in the conscious part. That's true, I guess. But a lot of ego things, and I mean, this can be attributed to superego as well, but a lot of it is subconscious. A lot of it is kind of like a fight or flight kind of response. Stimuli does very specific things. But what I do like, and it's very fascinating to me that humans were formed this way, is that there is an ego in between the ID and the superego. That's fascinating to me. because, like it says, the ego is a moderator of the ID and the superego, somewhere in between. It's like the logical aspect of your personality. All right, so I'm going to finish off with the superego. And like I said, there's entire studies, there's entire psychological theories, theologies, whatever you want to call them. There's a lot of there's a very deep rabbit hole to fall into with all of this. The reason I'm making these videos is because not everyone wants to do that. And I think that while self-care and spirituality are extremely like talked about and now becoming more of a mainstream normality, I think that some people choose to not necessarily go the harder way and learn the correct things or the most, I guess you could say, scientifically correct ways. And they would rather listen to people who might be giving them misinformation. Hence why I said that there's a lot of misinformation going around the ego, which is why I wanted to start with it. It's a very, very important part to a person. And the ego and the superego, I believe, are both in the conscious and unconscious. So the superego represents the learned rights and wrongs, moral aspects of your personality, and it represents internalized ideals and provides standards for judgment. Now this is where your trauma will cause you to not be in alignment with either or both your inner child and highest self. The superego is where a lot of this is formed. What we should do, right and wrong. The conscious prevents us from doing morally bad things, and the ego ideal, right? It motivates us to do what is morally correct. This is where people fuck up in child development the most. And it's not even your fault. That's what's so sad about it. Most people have a hard time healing from past trauma because they think that it's their fault that someone treated them the way that they did. They think it's their fault that their immature parents caused them to prematurely mature and caused them all the trauma of having to deal with that. And maybe they didn't have a good support system like I didn't. I went through the dark night of the soul on my own. They didn't have a good support system, so obviously, it's the world saying, this is your fault, right? No, it's not that. What it is the superego is the most clear and obvious way for you to understand how you are not in alignment with what you are supposed to be, or what you are even, really. When you learn your morals from people who don't have good ones, your morals are going to be the same as theirs. That's just how it is. It's why there's such a imbalance in the way that people act in general. Like, they might have a very sweet parents. They might have, parents that take care of them and do this and do that for them and literally go to the ends of the earth for them. But they never fully help them develop their moral system because they want to be that sweet person, Too much of a nice thing is a bad thing as well. That's why I'm going to talk about balance more than anything, because not being able to balance yourself is the worst injustice that you can do for yourself. You will be acting immaturely most of the time. You will be acting specifically on emotion a lot of the time, if not all of the time. And of these decisions that you make based on emotion, most of them will be incorrect. The emotions are there so that we can feel things, so that we can understand things better, so that we can understand ourselves better. When we see something and it makes us very sad, but we show this thing to a friend, to a family member, and it does not make them as sad as us, that means that we are different in a specific way. And it means that we have different stimuli. We react differently to the same stimuli. And also has to do with the subconscious, but we're not going to dive into that. If your parents were extremely judgmental of you, if your parents took the creative side of you and just absolutely shat on it, you're going to have this problem with the superego. And then that goes into affect the ego. And then the ID and your inner child and higher self are screaming at you like, yo, what the fuck, bro? Like, you know this isn't right. So it's your choice to fix it, but it's not your fault. That's just the biggest thing that you need to understand. Like, constant invalidation from either your parents or your peers or whoever will lead to ego problems, will lead to superego problems, okay? Coming from a place of love and compassion and understanding for the human experience, for other people, for the fact that your parents did what they did, okay? The problem is, parents want to talk about teenagers all the time. Like, the second you hit 13, they're like, oh, he's just not the same anymore. She's just not the same anymore. It's because you're developing into your own self, and they get mad about that. My parents did that. They got very mad that I was developing into my own self, and I didn't want to be like them anymore. So, what did they do? Invalidation, gaslighting, and due to the fact that they were just being negative overall, they were just negative, like, energies in my life, causing a lot of toxic masculinity. It formed negative habits within me as well, because that's the collective unconscious. The people that you surround yourself with are very important for your growth. If you hang around people who listen to, sad music all the time, think about life in a sad way, always look at the worst side of a situation, rather pessimistic. I mean, technically being realistic is basically just another form of pessimistic, because you are limiting yourself to things that you do not think that you can do. And that's not correct. I think being an optimist, coming from a place of love, a place of gratitude, and just overall compassion for everyone, because not everyone even understands what you understand at this point. Like, by watching this video, you now understand more than a lot of people. So do with that information what you will. What I would do is dive into the most homey kind of feeling spiritual practice, or just overall formulate ways to better yourself, to fix the problems that you have, because they're there. Everyone has problems. The healing journey never ends. You might heal from one thing, but the fact that you had to heal from something made you realize that you need something else to be healed so that this can fully take effect. And then it's just an endless cycle like that. It's not supposed to be easy, but it's not supposed to be something you avoid either. By walking through the fire instead of dancing around it, you are becoming your full self, right? Your ego controls your drive. If your ego is imbalanced, you will not have a good drive. You will not wake up every day with like, yes, I'm going to do this. Okay, everyone wants to make fun of Sigma males, right? But real Sigma males, not the ones that overly stunt, flex on people, do this, do that, talk about how cool they are all the time, whatever. Sigma males really have a very balanced ego, and they're very confident within themselves. Gary Vaynerchuk is a very good example to me of a balanced ego, because he's very confident, he's very loud with what he has to say, he doesn't really do second takes, he's a wealth of information. The guy is literally just like, you can give him like 2 or 3 things about your life, and he'll do, like, I'm the same way, but I'm just not as old yet. So there's a lot of things that I haven't experienced. I know for a fact that I am also tapped in with a higher source of knowledge, because I'm 20 and I have had to grow up, basically since I was 9 or 10. I think maybe 8, but I don't know. When you're 8, do you really even know things like that? But yeah, understanding yourself and loving yourself and showing compassion for yourself and gratitude for the experiences that you are given, regardless of positivity or negativity, is very important. Because when your ego has to initiate a fight or flight response, such as being defensive in an argument due to a subconscious habit, manipulation begins to happen. And a lot of it is within yourself. Again, it happens. It's just fight or flight. It's what it is. You manipulate yourself into believing that you cannot be wrong in the situation. You manipulate other people into believing your side of the story because at the end of the day, your ego is so deflated and your ego is so bruised that you're really unable to accept a lot of guilt. You're unable to accept a lot of accountability. You're unable to take accountability for a lot of your actions, right? Um, so yeah, I hope that I've kind of outlined a little bit more for you. I didn't want to make this video super long. Like I said, there's a wealth of knowledge to be found within the world. We quite literally, in our fingertips, have every single piece of information that humankind has to offer. What I would recommend, my steps to help rebuilding. I have these written down. Consult the internet. I already covered that. Be careful though. I will always say be careful with the internet. Like I said in the beginning, this is a very difficult topic. What I would ask that you do is go to people who do public speaking, who write psychological, books or, publish psychological theories, but explain it in ways that you can understand. Or even go to forums and have people explain it for you. Reddit is fantastic for that. Some of the best ways that I've been able to cope with, like I had anger issues growing up, and I had them till I was about 18, 19, something like that. It's a very recent thing for me, and I'm very proud of it because it's very hard to do to get over anger issues on your own because no one wants to help. But going towards stoicism was a big thing for me, understanding my emotions and understanding not to invalidate them, but not to give them full control, right? Because if you're imbalanced, if you do not have the capability of understanding that imbalance, all of a sudden you're acting on emotion. And what did I say about acting on emotion? It's not correct. It won't work. And I think that it's very possible for everyone to kind of have a collective understanding of that and move forward at least in ways that aren't detrimental to ourselves. And maybe even the opposite. The goal would be to be the opposite. No one wants to be detrimental to yourself, especially if it's not your own fault, because then you're going to kind of have this moment where you're like, wow, I was doing this for so long and it wasn't even me, right? So if you come at it from a different perspective, it can actually be a little bit detrimental to have self-realization sometimes. And, that's why like I said, we need to have an even bigger focus on mental health. I think that it should be like kind of implemented in schools even, because I don't think this public education system fully understands a lot of the impact that not only social media, but just overall growth due to social media within the groups that, go through that school, especially high school. High school is a bitch, bro. High school is a bitch. You're finding yourself and you're also trying to figure out who you fuck with at the same time. Do you know how difficult that is if you have problems, if you're not like everyone else, if you're someone who had to prematurely mature and you see these people doing just absolutely dumb things and you're like, doesn't really make sense to me. I mean, like, why would you even do that? It's different for everyone. And there's supposed to be a unilateral consensus. And it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. Not everyone's brain works the same. Not everyone thinks the same way. But yeah, before I get off too much on that, that is also a very deep rabbit hole. But yeah, my things to help. What I would also say is to form positive thought patterns. My music helps to do this, just saying. But what I would say is becoming an optimist is your best bet in life. Because even when things fail, you still get a lesson out of it. You don't take a loss, you take a lesson from it, okay? It's important that you understand that. Imagine your camera dies in the middle of your sentence. Okay. I'm just going to go over what I was saying because it seems logical to do so. Things that you can do to help develop yourself: spiritual practices, consulting the internet, but being careful while doing so and consulting knowledgeable and fact-based sources, always. Being as open as possible to different methodologies and different points of view, because if you can release judgment on releasing judgment, you're like halfway there. That's literally it. That's all you have to do. And, of course, showing yourself love, showing gratitude, and it will always be better than being hard on yourself and being like, why am I not being, it takes time. Healing takes time. And everyone's journey is different. So be patient, love yourself, don't blame yourself for things you couldn't control. It's hard to do, I know, but especially if you like to take accountability or take an over accountability for actions, it's counterproductive. And trying too hard goes along with being hard on yourself, but it's counterproductive towards the actual goal. But yeah, that's going to do it for this one. I don't want to dive into it too deep. I just want to get the conversation started. Very soon I'm in the process of restructuring my Discord server right now so that we can adapt for spiritual things. I also teach on cryptocurrency and stocks and overall financial literacy. So hopefully by the next video, I'll have all the renovations completed and we'll be able to really begin a community, because I have a lot of goals. I have a lot of goals that I want to be able to do with the community. Just make a lot of things happen, be the change that I see in the world. But until then, the outro is the same as the intro. Have a blessed rest of your morning, afternoon, and or evening. And love yourself. It's important.